Our next speaker is such a personality. He is a teacher, a manager, a person with many, many skills. And during his various responsibilities, he continues to teach scriptures. Even when I spoke to him a couple of days ago, he said, "Oh, I'm right now teaching Bhakti Shastri." He has developed and built a community focused on education, and he believes very strongly that we should think globally and act locally. Let me invite His Grace Aniruddha Prabhu from Melbourne, Australia. Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances, Aniruddha Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, close to Prabhupada, appreciate mine.
I'm going to hand over the symposium to you to take it forward from here.
Okay, thank you. Whoa. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakchurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahayam Dadati Svapadantikam Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Rangayate Girim Yatkripa Tamam Bande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam. Hare Krishna. Thanks, Tapan Mishra Prabhu, and thanks to all of those who are present, and hopefully those who are going to view this presentation in the future. I'm just going to share my screen here. With you. And I'll just switch over to my presentation. So, okay. I'll just close out some apps here. Now, I was born pretty much into education. My mother and father were both teachers. I often, well, practically speaking, lived in a school. On one occasion, our house would be right next door to the school where my father taught. And I witnessed and experienced the management of educational institutions at first hand, and the stress and the challenges that education can bring to those who are running a school, effectively speaking. So one of the challenges that I've faced as an ISKCON leader, as an ISKCON manager, and as a developer of an ISKCON community has been the establishment of education within the community. When I became the temple president, I quickly came to the realization that whilst running a temple is important, actually what I was doing was developing a community. And that community development, especially within ISKCON, is dependent upon education. It's interesting to note that Srila Prabhupada, when he came to America, on his passport, he listed his occupation as a teacher. And of course, you know, the basis of the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam and all of our scripture is education, teaching people who they are, what their purpose, what their mission in life is. So I wanted to talk today about establishing education at the local level. Whilst ISKCON is a global community, and we do need global vision for those who are leading the society at the highest level, at the same time, or the reality is that ISKCON exists at the local level for the local people. That's where the impact and the real action of ISKCON takes place at the local level. And it's important that we manage ISKCON communities in such a way so that at the local level we're displaying competence, we're providing impact and results for our local communities and for the residents of those communities. And so whilst managing a temple is important, we should always be keeping in mind that if we're successful at managing a temple, and all of the activities that are encompassed in an ISKCON temple, that effectively brings us to the point of community development. And so those of us who are managers should always keep that in mind, that, okay, we're managing a temple, but what are we doing it for? And effectively we'll be developing a community, and so therefore our activities should have a community focus. I'll tell you what I mean here. Each temple should have a certain degree of competence. First of all, the temple residents should be setting the example. The temple is the flagship, if you like, of the fleet, and we may have various preaching activities going on from the base, if you like. And of course, the devotees in the temple are setting the standard. They're raising the flag every morning, going to Mangalati, chanting their rounds, worshipping the deities, hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. So that the activities in the temple set the standard for all of the other activities that are going on within the community. They should have a successful Sankirtan party. They should be competent in book distribution. The deity worship should be first class. The prasadam distribution should be sumptuous and prolific, for want of a better word. The temple should be hosting very successful festivals. You know, the deity worship should be opulent and gorgeous. The kirtan should be uplifting and inspiring. The prasadam should be delicious. Now, if you're competent in these activities, then effectively our communities will grow. If we just focus on those activities as the core activities of an ISKCON temple, then we'll attract people from Sankirtan, people will be attracted. From book distribution, people will be attracted. If the deity worship is opulent, then people will be attracted. So the community will automatically grow, and then from that, education and training must follow. Because we'll have, and this is what's happened in ISKCON today, we now have, when I joined a temple, it was basically, this is in the late 70s, ISKCON was devotees living in temples. But in this day and age, if a temple is competent, if the management is competent, then people will be attracted. And so we now have the situation where in those days, 95% of the temple residents were ISKCON. In this day and age, the temple residents are a very small percentage of the community. And so we now have a congregation which is now 95% of an ISKCON community. So that community, part of community development is ensuring that we're providing education and training that previously people got in the ashram, in the temple. That training now has to be delivered to the individuals in the community at a local level. So what makes a successful local education effort? We should be considering cradle to the grave. I'm not sure where I've heard that before, but we should be planning to take our community membership as it grows, and it will grow. It does grow. If we follow those basic functions of an ISKCON temple, then our community will grow and our education will be successful when we plan for all of the individuals that are going to be involved. Yes, we'll need money. That's a given. But if your community is successful in, let's say, preaching, then automatically money will come. If we're worshipping the deities nicely, people will come to see the deities. They'll put money in the donation box. If you're feeding them sumptuously, Srila Prabhupada said in Melbourne, let every hungry man of Melbourne come and eat. And our experience is when you feed the local people, they'll, even those who aren't attracted to the deities, they'll still come for prasadam. When you're feeding people, naturally they'll respond. So, and they'll give. Prabhupada cites the principle of the dati pratigrinati in the Upadeshamrita. So if we're giving, then people will reciprocate. And that's why we need organisation. We need to plan effectively. I was just reading a letter from one of my friends, and he was quoting Eisenhower. I think Eisenhower was he American president? But he was also a general. No, he was a general first, I think, and a famous general in the Second World War. And he said that about planning, he said, when it comes to the battle, then planning is useless. Right? But when it comes to the war, and fighting, planning is also indispensable. So effectively, yes, we'll make plans, but we have to always adjust them. So in one sense, our plans are always outdated. But if we don't plan, well, there's another saying, if you don't plan, then you plan to fail. So we need organisation. Local communities need to be organised so that they will be successful. So how far into the future should we plan? Well, again, a quotation from George Harrison, who's a a famous personality, at least for those of us who grew up in the Western world in the 70s. And he wrote a song, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Right? So we need to plan how far into the future. We should, I recommend you should have a plan for today. Get up in the morning and then write a plan. You should have a plan for tomorrow. But especially with education, we need to plan considering 5 years ahead, or even in a very developed community, 10 years into the future. We need to be thinking. Now, this depends very much. My presentation is basically to temples in the West, but it can also apply to temples in India or small centres in India. The amount of planning that you're actually able to do will depend on the resources that you've got. And of course, when we're starting a temple off or a community project off, it may be that you're developing, you're just developing your Sankirtan party, you're just developing your deity worship program. If you're at that stage, then education and training means planning who's going to give the Bhagavatam class the next morning and who's going to give the Bhagavad Gita class. So depending on the institutional development or the level or the depth of your organisation will determine how much planning you do. But ideally, we should bring ourselves to the point where we have a dedicated team of devotees whose activities are purely focused on education. Initially, it may just be the temple leadership, the temple president, or the temple president and the vice president organising classes, starting off with the daily Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita class. But ideally, introducing programs, children's programs, youth programs, and adult education, so that gradually one can build the educational programs based on the level of institutional development that you have in your local temple. Now, what should we consider in developing a local education program? We need to be planning generationally. As you build your community, you want to be looking after the needs of the children. In fact, what we found in Melbourne was if you looked after the needs of the children, that would bring the parents. And this is in cultivating an Indian-based congregation, of which we have a sizable community in Melbourne. And what we discovered was that the children would come to the Saturday or the Sunday school programs, and then they would then preach to their parents. The parents would bring the kids because the parents wanted traditional values instilled in the children. And then the children would be brought to the temple regularly. Then the children would preach to the parents. And because the parents were coming, they'd go to the evening class that's being provided at the same time. And of course, they then become devotees. The children become devotees. The children would convince, in some cases, the children would convince the parents, you've got to be vegetarian, for example. So it's a good idea to look at this, what I call generational planning. A big challenge is engaging the youth. We have a sizable congregation, and many of them have now high school and college age, or university aged children or youth. So you have to be mindful of their needs, and of course adult education. When we talk about adult education, we've got so much suspect study. So we need to be planning for the study of the Bhagavad Gita, which is in Bhakti Shastri, study of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is in your Bhakti VIPLAVAH program, study of the Nectar of Devotion, which is in the Bhakti Shastri, also in Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is, your higher degrees of Shastric study. So they need to be concentrated on, especially the Bhakti Shastri, because that's the base level. Vocational study, I've only put here one branch of that, leadership development, but there's many topics of training and study that can be provided for your community. For example, actually, I could put here home-based program development, for example, critical to train your Bhakti Vriksha leaders so that the home-based cultivation programs, they need training. Teachers need training. And then we've got service training. We need to train devotees how to do book distribution. We need to train devotees how to do deity worship. We need to train devotees how to cook. Hospitality. A lot of what we do in ISKCON is just hospitality, pure and simple, on top of the deity worship. So, welcoming people, letting them know what's going on in your programs, making them feel comfortable and relaxed in the temple setting, feeding them. These are hospitality skills that can be taught effectively. In fact, there are hospitality diplomas and degrees that are taught in the secular world. We can teach those skills to people. Induction programs, for your volunteers, for your employees, for any contractors that you might be engaging. So all of these need to be considered in a very, very broad development of a local training effort. Now, what resources can we use?
Aniruddha Prabhu, we would request you to take a few questions also. We're 21 minutes to the talk.
Okay.
So if you can, you can take another minute to wrap it up. If there are some important thoughts, and then we'll take some questions, Prabhu.
Yeah, sure, no worries. What resources can we use? Well, we're building community, so look into the community. Interesting situation in Melbourne is our local primary school has 40 Hare Krishna kids, and they love our kids because primarily from the Indian community, they boost the school's performance. So they're happy to have our kids there. But then the local teachers, they'll teach devotional songs, for example. Even at one day in the assembly, because we're in lockdown now, but one day on a Thursday, I think it is, they played the Nrsimha prayers for the calling the local school kids to the assembly. So look broadly. There are educational facilities out there that we could take advantage of. We need to have a good constituent management system, a CRM system, and in the CRM system we should be tracking things like donations, service, and sadhana, so that we can recommend people for initiation, for example. Another important element of education is training the devotees and preparing them for initiation. So we need to keep track of the progress that they're making. We need to consider the life cycle of a student and all the different stages that they go through. Having an SMS, student management system, even if you're very highly developed, when you've got hundreds of students like we have, when you've got a few students, keeping track of everything in an Excel spreadsheet is doable. But when you get hundreds of students, then you need to start looking at systems that can manage that. My recommendation for everybody is, as soon as possible, establish a board of education. So they're devotees whose role it is to look at strategy, look at the mission, the vision, what are we going to do, what resources do we have, who are the leaders, what do they want to do. So planning, measuring performance, developing policies and procedures, and managing compliance. Very important in developed countries. Things like child protection and teacher training standards, these are all very important to establish credibility within the community. Okay, I think I'll finish here.
Thank you. Much of ISKCON does exist at the local level, yes. Yet there are some elements of ISKCON that have a global role. What advice would you offer, Prabhu, for those global entities to successfully interact with and serve ISKCON at the local level? So this is a question from Narsimha Kavacha Prabhu, who's kindly joined us, our Minister for Deity Worship.
Well, Hare Krishna. Hare Bol.
Prabhu, we can't hear you. You'll have to speak up a little bit, Aniruddha Prabhu.
Okay, can you hear me?
Aniruddha Prabhu, I can't hear you. Perhaps that's a problem with my end, but I'll ask my organizers if they're able to hear. Can one of the panelists confirm to me that they're able to hear Aniruddha Prabhu clearly?
No, Prabhuji, not clearly. Could you speak a little louder or come closer to the microphone?
Yeah, from the panelist and also from participants, we're not able to hear you. Padma Sundari Mataji also mentions the same.
Not at all.
Aniruddha Prabhu, it's impossible to hear anything. I don't know why, because you were audible up till now, and suddenly you're not. May I please, on behalf of the symposium and the participants, request you that you could kindly just post the answer on the chat. The question is in the Q&A panel, and if you can please address that question in the chat in writing, we'll be most grateful.
Okay, thank you. That's weird.
I heard that briefly, very, very softly. Okay. Aniruddha Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances. Thank you for addressing us on this important aspect of community centered around education.